Hello, this is a brief presentation which acts as a guide for completing the spreadsheet of procedures for the NJR Data Quality Shoulder Audit. We would first like to thank you for undertaking this National Shoulder Arthroplasty Audit. Hopefully, you will have already watched the introductory video which explains the purpose of the audit, and you should have received emails with information about the purpose and the process of this audit. You will receive, or may have already received, a spreadsheet with the list of procedures relevant to the units in your trust. When you open your spreadsheet, it should be in the format of this one displayed here. There are two sheets in the spreadsheet. The first sheet is called Trust Information, and the second sheet is called Shoulder Procedure Details. Starting on the first sheet, Trust Information. The top box contains some basic instructions on what needs to be done. There are three main processes. We start with the clinical data in combination with the spreadsheet. You start by looking at the list of procedures, which are listed on the second sheet called Shoulder Procedure Details sheet. And from there, you determine which of those procedures are truly missing from the NJR. You then collate the clinical data for these missing procedures and fill in the relevant NJR MDS form. We're using MDS version 8 only, which is our latest version, and S1 refers to a primary procedure and S2 to a revision procedure. You use the clinical data that you're finding to fill in these NJR forms, and at the same time, you complete the required fields on the shoulder procedure detail sheet, which we'll come to in a little while. Once you've got all of that done for all the procedures, you will submit the data to the NJR. So you either use the NJR form yourself to submit the procedures to the NJR, or if you're not the hospital data manager, or if you're not the one submitting the data, you will hand the NJR forms to the relevant person for them to input onto the NJR. At this stage, you'll check that the spreadsheet is complete, and you'll return this to the NJR health data analyst, who will look at it to verify it, check it, and mark your unit off, or not just your unit, but your trust off, as having completed the shoulder audit project. Now, with emailing the spreadsheet across, there's some things to bear in mind. We're looking first at the email address that you'll use to send the data to, and then we'll look at the email that you'll use to send the data from. This is critical because the spreadsheet contains patient identifiable data, and we need to handle it in line with data protection regulations. So the email to use to send to is joanne.shapiro@nhs.net. Now, it's imperative that only this email address is used because it's an nhs.net email account, which has built-in encryption to manage the patient-sensitive data. Now, using an email address to send from, ideally you use an nhs.net account because, again, sending from and to an nhs.net account ensures that there's encryption throughout the process. However, if you do not have access to an nhs.net account, then you can use a different email address, but then you would need to encrypt either the file itself or the whole email. Now, the encryption you'll use will be in line with the local information governance policies for your trust, but we do have some information on our website relating to encryption, so please do go along to the Shoulder Audit website to find that documentation. For support contact for anything related to the audit, anything at all, please use the email address called shouldeраuditnjr@gmail.com. The joanne.shapiro@nhs.net email account is used simply for data transfer. For more guidance on the audit itself, not just necessarily the spreadsheet completion, please see the introduction video on the Shoulder Audit website. moving a little bit further down this sheet, what you will find on your sheet that you receive is the trust, which is your trust. I've put demo trust in here for demo purposes. And below that, the hospitals for that trust. So there'll definitely be one hospital at least. I've named mine Demo Hospital 1 for demo purposes. And if you have the ODS code, that's useful to us. If you don't, that's fine. And there's usually a maximum of 4 hospitals in a trust doing shoulder arthroplasties. But you might find you have just the one hospital, or often there may be 1 or 2. Then the last box to fill in, we're asking you to double check the procedures that you have already input onto the NJR and to state what method you have to check that. So the purpose of this is really to save you some time. What might happen is that you might find that there are some procedures listed on the spreadsheet that actually are already on the NJR, and we don't want you to waste your time by collating the data and preparing to input this onto the NJR and finding it's already there. So whilst we've made every effort to avoid a scenario of listing a procedure that's already on the NJR, there is a small chance that the procedure can fall through the net and appear on the list, and there are a few reasons for this. The first reason is where patients have not consented to share their personal details with the NJR. So while such a procedure will still be input onto the NJR, it will be done so without the patient's identifying details. This can result in a mismatch between the HES data and the NJR data. And whilst we do have some other matching processes done to identify a match, we do this on procedure type, on surgery date, on unit that the procedure was done at, but there is a chance that this can fall through the net. Another reason why data might appear on the list when it shouldn't is where data might be wrong on either the NJR site or portal or HES data. And this mismatch can be in things like the dates of the procedure or the patient identifying details or the procedure type and sometimes the hospital that it was done at. In this case, what would need to be done is if the information on the NJR is incorrect, rather than re-inputting the procedure, we just need to correct that data. If the data is wrong on the HES site, well, there's nothing we can do about that. But we can identify that on the spreadsheet. A third reason why procedures might appear on the list when they shouldn't is when our analysis and matching process was done before a procedure was put onto the NJR. This would normally affect procedures in later years, so those done in usually, say, 2019 or 2020, where they've recently been input, and we've got this slight time lapse between procedures being listed and gathered for the purpose of sending to the trust and then being input, and hopefully they're few and far between. Moving on to the shoulder procedure details sheet. This sheet contains the list of procedures that we're asking you to investigate. The sheet is divided into 2 sections. So columns A to L are details from national records, so the HES data. And here we have listed the information to help you to identify the notes, but no input is required from you. You'll see if you did try to input any data, or, the system will not allow you to. The audit ID is a unique key, so that if we need to liaise regarding a procedure, we have a reference point. If we scroll along, we can see that columns M to AE are details that we're asking your unit or your trust to complete. So back to the first columns, the data we'll provide you with are things like the patient identifiers, so the NHS number, local hospital IDs. This code helped us to identify which unit it was said that the procedure occurred at. The patient's date of birth, all of this is demo data, none of this is real data, as you can see. The HES year, when patient was admitted. The operation dates, there may be more than one date for more than one surgery, and that will be separated by a pipe. So that's why you'll see a strange format at times. These are the codes that helped us to identify that this was a shoulder code, and this is what that code relates to, what procedure type it is, and the procedure side. I've listed here all the OPCS codes in case that's of any use to you. It's not going to be isolated just to the shoulder codes. If you don't find that useful, that's no problem to just move on from that. Getting on to columns M, this is details that we're asking you to return to us. That is further divided into 3 sections. We've got preliminary checks, and this is to help you to identify if the procedure actually needs to be collated. So again, as I said in the previous sheet, that we don't want to waste your time in collecting data that's already on the NJR. So if there's a way you can identify if the procedure is on the NJR already, then that will save you that work. So in the drop-down boxes, you will have, or in each cell you have drop-down boxes which will tell you what procedure is permitted to be entered and a little description of what that cell is about. So here we're saying when you look at this procedure and you've got the clinical notes, can you see, was it either previously submitted to the NJR? Is it an NJR procedure that actually does need to be input? Is it not an NJR procedure? It happens from time to time that the codes are input wrong, or maybe it's a shoulder procedure but not a shoulder arthroplasty. Here you might find, it doesn't happen that often, but you might find that it is an NJR procedure but not a shoulder procedure. It might be more, well, the most typical one would be an elbow procedure. And then we would need to check if that procedure is still missing from the NJR. It would still require input, even though it's not a shoulder procedure. Then you might find also, not very frequently, but that it is an NJR procedure, but it was actually performed at a different unit, in which case we need to then get the details over to that unit. And this box is, or this option other, is just for anything we might not have already thought of. In this case, I'm going to say that this was previously submitted to the NJR, if I found that, just as an example. And moving on to the next box, we then want to say, well, if it is we want to know, does this need to be submitted to the NJR? Now, it would be no in this case because it is already in the NJR. If it weren't and it were an NJR procedure, you would say yes. The other options are yes, but by the unit where it was performed, so we wouldn't be expecting you to input that procedure. And here it would be, this would most often happen in a case like this, where it is previously submitted to the NJR, but there might have been something wrong, for example, the procedure date. If you do find that it's already on the NJR, we're going to ask you to put in the NJR index. I've put a demo one in there. And this, we're asking for a brief description of the procedure if it's a non-NJR procedure. So in this case, that's irrelevant, so you don't need to do anything there. Now, because this procedure has previously been submitted, you don't need to fill in all this data. There's no point. The only thing is we'd ask you to identify anything that is maybe wrong. For example, maybe the procedure date, and then scrolling right across to the comments, you might say procedure date needs amending, for example. And then move on to the second procedure in the list. We might find from this one that yes, it is actually missing. It is an NJR procedure, shoulder. And in that case, the answer will be yes, it does need to be input. This box becomes irrelevant because it is there's no existing NJR index yet, and that's also irrelevant. Here you'll find that for these historic records, the most common scenario is that the NJR consent is unknown, and we're not asking units to go back to the patient to ask if they consent. We simply say unknown. It might be that you do find that the details are found in the notes to say NJ consent, yes or no, in which case you can put that in. And the only the kind of one we're concerned about is if the consent is no, because in that case, you do not want to enter in the patient forename and surname. I'll see if we say no, those will be grayed out to indicate you don't need to fill them in. But an unknown and a yes means you do need to fill it in, because unknown, there is implied consent. So we'll just do a type name. And whatever the operation date it's found to be. It will need to be within the date range. So if I had to put in a date range like that, you will get a warning to say that it's only dates between 2012 and 2020 that are permitted. So you might need to just go back and fill in a relevant date and the consultant's name. And if you have his GMC code, that is very helpful for us, especially in the case of a consultant, there being more than one consultant with the same name. With the procedure type, we just want to know here, is it a primary or a revision? S1 links up to the form you'll be using, so that's just a reminder. If we say, for example, that it's a primary, then you have your choices of these primary procedures here. If you can't read the details fully, then just go and expand the cell. Let me just see if I can do that. It might be that it's locked, so I can't do that. I'll make a note of that to change that. And if you chose a revision procedure, then you have these ones below to choose from. The system doesn't automatically filter it out depending on whether you choose primary or revision, so just take care to select the appropriate procedure. If it's a revision procedure, then we're asking the details of what it's being revised from. So was it a primary or was it already a revision that's being re-revised? And here we want to know what is it being revised to, so a sub procedure type. And here you've got all the different options here. I'll choose any one there, and then your joint side. And you've got your left, your right, and your bilateral. If it's a bilateral, then really we need two procedures submitted. It could be under one NJR index if it's a same-day procedure, but for the purposes of keeping this simple for you, we're only asking you to fill in the details of one of the procedures, even though it is bilateral, and there would be details for two required on the NJR. Now, this part is talking about what your findings are from your clinical investigation. And one of the most critical things is, have all the components for the procedure been found? This is important because if they haven't been found, then the procedure will either not be able to be input, or it could be partially input and not fully submitted if the components are missing. And the idea of the NJR being patient safety, tracking implants being put into patients, this part is really critical. So we'd like to know from you is, have they been found? Now, if the procedure is already on the NJR, you don't need to do that. So you can say NA or leave it blank. You can say yes if they've been found, no if they haven't, which we're hoping you're not going to be having to use, but you might have a scenario where only some of the components are found, and we'd rather have some components input than none. So please do go ahead and input them, but note that only some have been found, so we know that it's not a completed input. And you'll have some scenarios where none of the procedure implants will be used because it's a single-stage revision where implants are removed rather than input. I'm going to say yes here, and or as an example for demo purposes, I'll say some, but not all, and it might be that the cement component stickers were unreadable, which is unfortunate, but would at least allow the main components to be input. Now we want to know, this is a checklist for you, has an NJR form been completed? The options are yes, which is hopefully going to be the most commonly used option. No, if it's still to be done. We would prefer to avoid that sort of scenario because the idea is that we complete everything together, that the spreadsheet is returned to us when everything's been done, so there's nothing left to be done, but we leave that option in case of unforeseen circumstances. It might be a no, not needed. That would be the case in actually the top one, where it's non-NJR, where the NJR procedure has already been put, so it would be not needed there. But in this case, yes, we hope it is done. And the last option would be a no when it's to be done by a procedure where it was actually performed. So that's when we're moving that procedure from your unit to the relevant one. And in here you can just put any comments that you might have, but most commonly there won't be any. Let's see if we can run through one more example. And here we might say, find that this is not an NJR procedure, it's just been coded wrong. Does it need to be submitted? It would be no. There would be no previous NJR number needed. Brief description, you could say this was actually it might be a shoulder procedure, but not a arthroplasty. So here it was just surgery done with pins. This will be irrelevant because it's not an NJR procedure, so you can just move along to here. And unless it's something you'd like to tell us, you can put it in the comments field. You can still put something in even though it's grayed out. The grayed out is to indicate that you don't need to fill in everything else. And that covers most of the examples of the typical scenarios you'll come across. As I say, you might have the unusual ones of it being not a shoulder procedure, but still an NJR procedure, or being from another unit, and then just fill the appropriate boxes in along the rest of the spreadsheet. And when that is all completed, you can save that spreadsheet and email it back to us according to the instructions on that trust information sheet. Thank you for listening. I hope this has been helpful, and if not, please do not hesitate to reach out to us.